former law professor who taught constitutional law and who's been providing guidance on how to navigate this, and he joins me now. Good to have you here.
Delighted to be with you.
What do you see? I mean, there was complaints about this from the Republicans, and there was a ghost of a point within it, which is that the Intelligence Committee doing the sort of fact-finding part of this inquiry was a little different than how it's been handled in the past when the Judiciary Committee did that part. Given that it's now being passed from Intel to the Judiciary Committee, what do you view as your committee's role?
We're going to look at what the founders meant by having impeachment in the Constitution. We know the Electoral College meets every 4 years. So why did the framers decide to have impeachment in there? And I think they wanted the people to have a last instrument of constitutional self-defense against a president who acts like a king and tramples the rule of law. Our Constitution is an anti-monarchical Constitution. It's all about getting rid of the kings. Remember, before America, it was all kings and queens and corruption and treachery and war by the kingdoms for power. Our founders wanted to create government on a different principle. And that's why in the old days, it was the king and the queen, and then the nobility and the clergy and the state. And then at the very bottom was the people. And our founders flipped it upside down and said, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union. And we started it that way, and the framers put in every conceivable safeguard to make sure the president would not become like a king.
You're using this sort of originalist framework, which is interesting to me as a sort of selection of legal theory. I mean, what do you say to someone who says, I don't really care what the founders thought or like what you and your law professors think? Like, why does it matter to me? Like, why should I care? I'm a nurse, or I'm a real estate professional, and I don't like Donald Trump, but like, what is the bite of what he has done in the life of the Republic and in my life as a citizen?
And the whole point of our Constitution is that it's about the common people. It's about all of us. The government has got to be an instrument of the common good for everybody. It's not a money-making operation for one guy and his royal family. It's not an opportunity for a president to expand his business empire and to work with tyrants and despots around the world to promote his financial and political interests. It's supposed to be an instrument of the common good. That it's supposed to be to advance the common good, to provide for the common defense, to promote the general welfare, to preserve to ourselves and our posterity the blessings of liberty. That's in the preamble of our Constitution, and all of that flows right into Article 1, which says the legislative power is vested in Congress. It's up to Congress to be the representatives of the people, and we are vested with the whole lawmaking power, everything: commerce, war, naturalization, copyright. And then you get to Article 2, and it's 4 short sections, and one of them is about impeaching a president who forgets what his job is. And what's his real job? To take care that the laws are faithfully executed.
So you've just outlined a broad case against this president, obviously in the sort of abstract theoretical terms, but about the sort of difference between the presidency as a public trust for the promotion of the general welfare, right, which is our sort of joint constitutional conception, and I think our conception of good government, versus the president using it as a sort of a private get-rich-quick operation or a private means of machine power.
That's right.
We've seen like corrupt ward bosses, right?
Yes.
Is that the case that you anticipate making? Because that's a broader case than what I understand is coming down the pipe from Intel, which is about Ukraine.
Well, I haven't even mentioned the facts yet. I'm talking about the facts related to the framers of the Constitution.
Right.
What they had in mind. We've got to recover that, Chris. In other words, we need a national civics lesson into what our Constitution is about. The Congress was charged with the power of promoting the general welfare. It's Congress that passes all of the laws. The president's job is to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. He's the agent of the popular will as expressed through Congress. Why do we have the power to impeach the president and he doesn't have the power to impeach us? It's because the framers of the Constitution wanted to put the people and their representatives in charge. What we're about to embark on is not about crime and punishment. Donald Trump would not go to jail for one day under an impeachment. It's about making sure that the government is working for the people and not for the private interests of the president or anyone else.
Here's my sociological diagnosis of the way in which the House Democratic Caucus has responded to new facts vis-a-vis impeachment of the president. It's the following. I want to hear your response. Basically, they thought the Mueller report was very bad. They thought that it showed that the president did obstruct justice and that that's an impeachable offense. But they were also wary that it was essentially a difficult case to make to the public and that there's a political will that has to happen. And the break glass moment for the members of your caucus was seeing him use his presidential powers to attempt to rig the next election.
Yes.
That was the break glass moment. And how much does that figure in the case that you think that you have to make to the American people about why it crosses such an important line?
I think it's essential. And I think you're also right about the Mueller report. The Mueller report was about what happened in 2016 in that election. And remember, Attorney General Barr essentially kidnapped the report for 3.5 weeks, misstated the contents, misled the public, prompting Special Counsel Mueller to write not one but 2 letters of protest about confusion of the public. But this was very different with the Ukraine shakedown because it was happening in real time. And the president wasn't delegating it to Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr. He was doing it himself. He was the one on that July 25th phone call. He was the one who sent Rudy Giuliani and his team of operatives over there in order to shake down the Ukrainian government. So all of this happened in real time. Attorney General Barr was not able to cover it up. And so this is the most vivid demonstration of how they're doing business in the Trump White House.
But that is the question that haunts me personally as a journalist who covers this day in, day out, which is this the only time they did this? Is it plausible that it is? And if it isn't, I would like to have the facts in evidence about what the back channel with Turkey is like and what the back channel with Saudi Arabia is like and a variety of other foreign policy moves specifically the president has made through those back channels that have been incredibly friendly to states that have left people scratching their head. The president's own national security advisor, John Bolton, told a private group of people he thinks financial interests are driving the president's Turkey policy. That's John Bolton. That's what he said in a private dinner.
Yes. And, the emoluments clause is obviously central to understanding the framers' conception of our Constitution. It's not the president's job to be running off, selling his influence to foreign powers in order to get himself rich, and nor is it the president's job to channel the taxpayers' money into his own private businesses.
Right, but that's a legal response to a factual question. My point is, I do not feel like I know fully, as just a U.S. citizen and also as a journalist who covers this, the full facts of the matter of what those irregular channels look like.
Well, look, I share your passion for finding out the answers to every single one of those particular leads. There's no doubt that that's something that we have got to do in terms of conducting our oversight responsibility. On the other hand, Donald Trump, I would say, not here in the context of the impeachment process, but as a political observer who's watched him now for several years in Congress, he is a one-man crime wave. This guy has more than 3,000 lawsuits that he's embroiled in. And when he was in private business, he didn't pay the contractors and he didn't pay the plumbers and he didn't pay the carpenters. He didn't pay anybody. And there's lots of litigation there. There's litigation with unions and on and on and on. We're not going to be able to do all of that here. We're not going to be able to do. But what we can do is to determine whether there were high crimes and misdemeanors. Now, the Constitution talks about treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Those are offenses against the state. They're betrayals of the essential duties of the office. Treason betrays the national security. Bribery betrays the public interest. And the other high crimes and misdemeanors are essentially substituting your private interests and ambitions for the national interest and for the public interest. And I think the Ukraine episode captures all of them, but it also leads into the other kinds of abuses of power, the sorts of obstruction of justice that we've seen from the very beginning, as the president has tried to blockade witnesses, he's tried to withhold evidence, he's tried to frustrate our investigation at every turn. And everybody should be concerned about that. Whatever you think about the shakedown itself, whether you think it was bribery, extortion, or something else, whatever you think about that, everybody should be opposed to the president being able to obstruct justice, because what it means is we have a president who can operate with impunity and immunity because he's able to cover up all the evidence of his crimes. That's a very dangerous precedent for us to set.
All right. Congressman Jamie Raskin, we will be seeing you on Wednesday at that hearing. Come by any time as we go through this process.
Thank you for having me,
Thank
Chris.
you. Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.